Good morning, Bridge family. Yes, it's me. It's Pastor Gwinyai back again. But I guess you still remember me as Uncle Gwi. This is very strange. I don't know how you guys are getting used to it. This whole talking to or listening to someone preach on a camera. Hopefully, LG won't have an ugly background behind me. But I might be in a beach somewhere right now as you're looking at me. Or it might change and I'm at the Eiffel Tower. Or who knows what'll be behind me. This morning, I want to share with you very briefly on a message I'm titling More Than a Mess. And this thought came to me early in the week because normally my daughter, I've got a 2.5-year-old, her name is Grace. So she'll have her toys that she plays with and they'll be laid out in the house and she doesn't pack up and she leaves them lying around. So sometimes often I go switch on the geyser in the morning and I'll step over one of these toys or step on one of these toys. And there are a few pains that hurt more than stepping on a toy. Bumping your toe on the corner of something is almost in that same sort of level. But then I'll step on a toy and see these little bricks, plastic bricks that she uses to build things, and they'll be left in a mess on the floor. And I'll often then step on one of those and it hurts terribly. And then I'm always on her case. Grace, you must clean up after you finish playing. You must clean up your mess. The other day, she then said to me, no, Baba, it's not a mess. Those are my bricks. And I was like, that's actually quite profound. That in her perspective, in her seeing, that she sees not just the laid out bricks, but there's something that can be made or that will be made from these bricks. And it then got me thinking about some of the things that we think are messes, but they are possibly more than a mess. That when we see a mess, that God might have something more for us in that mess than the mess that we just see. Even think about this whole COVID-19 lockdown situation, that it might seem a mess, but what if God in that mess has something in it for you? So 3 words that we're going to walk through in the next few minutes, and we're going to start with that word actual mess. And we're going to read from Genesis 42, Genesis 43 in verse 24. It tells the story of Jacob and Esau. And basic background, Esau has now come in from hunting. Esau was the more athletic brother of the two. Well-built, hairy, monyaracho remuri. And Esau then goes off to hunt. But Esau then comes back. I assume Esau hadn't caught anything and he's hungry. And he comes and he sees his brother Jacob had made a meal. And Jacob was the more homely guy, the more chilled, more reserved, the guy who sits at the cabin. And he was a chef, mom's favorite, mama's boy even. And he had made this stew. Scripture in the book of Hebrews 12, verse 16. We'll use the ASV version, American Standard. It says, lest there be a fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one mess of meat sold his own birthright. Here it's recounting this story that I'm referring to, where Jacob then convinces Esau to give up his birthright for a bowl of food, for a mess of meat. And scripture then refers to it as a mess. And this morning I want to tell you that if Esau understood that what Jacob was carrying was more than a mess, he would have made a different decision. That what actually he was giving up for a mess was a birthright. That within that birthright there was more to it, more to this mess than what he had perceived and what he had understood. Because the devil actually can't take your birthright. The devil can't take these things that are yours, that God has given to you, that God has established for you. You have to actually give them up. So Esau, being the monya that he was, actually could have beaten up Jacob and taken this food from him anyway. But Esau was tricked by Jacob into giving up his birthright for just a mess. God has given you also many other things that seem like messes that you must then now take value and hold stock of. That your birthright, even the peace that he's given you, that you have to value and hold on to the peace that is given you. Scripture tells us that he has given you peace. His peace he has given you. In John 14, he leaves us with peace. Peace is actually our inheritance, and that we can't now give up our peace or exchange our peace for just a mess. That the devil would then try and steal our peace and trick us into giving up peace. That you now as a teenager on Zoom with your teachers, on Google Classroom with your teachers, would then perceive and see that as the peace of the Lord that he has for you. A peace, a mess that he has given to you, that you can't and you shouldn't give up that for anything. Even beyond peace, God has also given you joy unspeakable, joy full of glory. That even in your joy, that you can't let the enemy steal. That even when you're sad, when you're depressed, when even now times are seeming to be against you, where things don't seem to be going your way, where everything in life now seems to be pressing on you, that you can't give up your joy. You can't give up that right that Jesus purchased for you, that he gave you just for a mere mess, for a mere bowl. That you would exchange this bowl for a momentary pleasure. I think that's even a good way to kind of look at some of the things that you've been discussing in some of your smaller groups during Zoom. Tricky topics, things like sex, pornography, etc. Uncle Kwezi and the crew are very brave to be tackling those. But I think those are very good bowls or examples of bowls. Those are good examples of messes that we give up for a temporary satisfaction, even though we have an eternal birthright that's waiting for us. That you're going to give up your sexual purity for one moment with a picture, with an image on a screen, for what you could have received eternally with your wife, for a glorious moment with your husband in the future. That you don't, like Esau, now give up for a mere mess an eternal birthright that God has for you. So sometimes we then even think that we are grown and we're mature, and that we then even maybe add age to this here mess, and you think you've understood certain things. I know your theme this year is grow. But I want to implore you this morning that you don't just grow, but that you also become mature. That it's not enough to just grow physically. Scripture even constantly, when it refers to how individuals grew, it always adds something. So they grow physically, yes, but also in wisdom and in stature, when it was referring to Jesus. Jacob and Esau, when Scripture talks about them growing, it doesn't add anything to them. So I'm convinced that they just grew, and they just grew physically. But maturing, they hadn't really matured. So I'd say to you now, bridge member, don't just grow physically, but also grow spiritually, also mature in other areas. So that even when you've added to this mess, if you add a little age as you grow older, you add maturity as well. So now we've said we're adding a bit of age. And the second word I want to use is message. So not just a mess, but let's add some age to that mess and let's make it a message. That God would then have messages set up for you that would then increase and grow you and mature you. That every experience, every mess you go through, when you add some maturity to it, can then be made into a message. That it's not just what you go through, what you experience, but what's more important is how you respond and how you react to what you go through and what you experience. Because everyone goes through something. Everyone is going through the same thing that you're going through, with the frustrations, with the annoyances, with the difficulties. But all of those only make sense when you've matured and you add to that mess and you make it a message. So my encouragement to you again is that you don't only end in the mess, but when you mature and you work those things that God is doing within your life for greater good, you then turn that mess into a message. Easiest example that comes to my mind is the boy Joseph. So the man Joseph goes through a lot, from the pit all the way to the palace, in between, accused by Potiphar's wife, sent into jail, forgotten by the homies in the prison, but he eventually comes out on top. At the end of all of his experiences, the same people that sold him into this whole mess, through his age now and through his understanding and perspective of what God was doing in his life, he then turns that into a message and is able to say to them, what you meant for evil, God has worked for good. Jacob then, Joseph now has a perspective of how he then sees the experience that he went through and is able to turn his mess into a message. And the last mess word, the third one, is Messiah. That there is a Messiah that we serve, that in design was what God has been working the mess into. That God then sent a Jesus into the mess that was the world to then make him our Messiah. That the Messiah then steps into a situation, into a messy circumstance and lifts it up and he elevates it. And Jesus, our Messiah, then turns that mess into something glorious. I'm reminded now very quickly of the story of Lazarus, where his sister Mary and Martha thought they were in a mess. that it was a seemingly dire situation, that their brother had now then passed away. He was actually sick initially. Then they send word to Jesus to say, Jesus, the one that you love, our brother, is unwell. Come and help him out. Lazarus then even goes to die. And Jesus himself remains a bit longer where he was. And he continues to let this mess grow. And the situation gets worse and worse till Lazarus dies. Lazarus is buried, and Lazarus is put in a tomb. Then Jesus shows up later to the mess. In true Jesus fashion, he's cool, calm, and collected. He shows up and even inquires of Mary and Martha as to why they are distressed. But Jesus then takes this mess, and as the Messiah that he is, then turns the entire situation around. That the mess that was there then reveals and shows us the Messiah. That yes, Jesus could have come and healed him. Yeah, that's just phase one. That's just level one of his Messiahhood. But imagine a resurrection. That Jesus was actually setting up this whole mess for a resurrection, to bring someone who had died back to life. That Jesus then shows up on the scene and is the Messiah of the mess that's popping off. And he says, Lazarus, come forth. And this brother that they had laid to rest, whose body had already begun to rot, this guy who had passed away, Jesus then shows up in the mess and raises him from the dead. That's the type of the Messiah that we serve. That he takes a mess, that he encompasses it in himself as a message, and he shows himself as a Messiah. That in Jesus himself, the mess that you currently find yourself in, you can take and form and make it into a message and ultimately reveal the Messiah to anyone who needs, who desires, or who has, who doesn't have a relationship with him. And I would encourage you this morning that every mess that you're in is actually a message that is designed to reveal the Messiah. So that now you may be a teenager who's trying to figure out how to control their impulses, like Esau. That you are lost in trying to handle or have a grapple on pornography, or even a wavering eye. That there's even struggle with depression that you might be going through. That like Jacob, you maybe see that your father doesn't appreciate you a certain way, or you're more inclined to depression, and you feel a certain way. But that God in that mess guarantees that he will find you. That he will step down off of his throne like he did for us humanity. That he would become human and be clothed in flesh, just so that he would come and rescue you from that mess. And that's the whole function of a Messiah. He steps into a mess to pull you out of the mess. So don't try now in your own strength to fight through some of the messes that you're going through. I would implore you to reach out, to connect, not just with the aunts and the uncles, but even with your peers. There's a lot that are around you that will be able to pull you out of the mess that you're currently in. So remain accountable. If you don't have a personal pastor, find one. Because that's one of the keys now that will unlock for you that release from the mess that you're in. Connect with age, connect with maturity, connect with someone who's been through what you're currently going through, so that they can release you and unlock you and connect you with the Messiah. God knew you before he even created you. He says this to Jeremiah in the book of Jeremiah, and that you were created for a specific purpose. Like imagine, think about it this way, that 30 years ago, almost 33 years ago, God so designed and desired that you would need to hear me speak to you now in this moment, and then he created me. That he formed me in my mother's womb for this specific moment and purpose. That the whole point of Gwinyai being alive was to release you now from the mess that you currently find yourself in. And the exact same purpose exists over your life. That there is a function that God has for you. There is a mess that you're supposed to clean up. There's someone that you're supposed to release and connect to the Messiah. There's a message that you're supposed to deliver that only you can. There's experiences that you've gone through. There's life choices, there's decisions, there's habits that you've developed and formed. And there's a way that God is creating circumstances around you so that you can become that specific message that connects someone to the Messiah. So don't discount any of the things that you're going through. Work through them, shift the perspectives that God has placed for you, and line them up so that you can be what you are meant to be to whoever you're meant to be. Not just for yourself, but for those that you encounter. So Bridge member, connect with God. Hold on to that mess. Turn it into a message and connect someone to the Messiah. Have a good week.